How do you do? Mr. Carl Lemley feels it would be a little unkind to present this picture without just a word of friendly warning. We are about to unfold the story of Frankenstein, a man of science who sought to create a man after his own image without reckoning upon God. It is one of the strangest tales ever told. It deals with the two great mysteries of creation, life and death. I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, well, we've warned you.
Happy Halloween. Now that it's spooky season and I feel like making Halloween content, why not dig into a literary classic that is also great material for discussions about ethics? Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, is a cultural milestone. It influenced pop culture in ways that are difficult to measure, and arguably it started the genre we now know of as science fiction. The story was written by then 18 years old Mary Shelley as part of a bet with her husband Percy Shelley and Lord Byron on who could write the best horror story. I'd assume she won the bet. It was first published anonymously in 1818 when she was 20, with her name first appearing on the second edition. Here's a quick summary of the original story so we have a basis for our discussions. The original story is told by the narrator, Victor Frankenstein, to an expeditor on the North Pole who finds him chasing the monster. He sees the same ambitions in him that ruined his life and tells his story as a cautionary tale. He talks fondly about his family and his studies, then eventually tells about the creation of the monster, how he had discovered the secret of life and creates a humanoid, but when he actually brings it to life, he is horrified by what he had done and flees. By the time he returns, the monster is already gone. The creature's life is narrated by the creature himself, as Frankenstein tells it. He goes into detail on how he spent his life hiding, how he learned to speak and read by himself, observing a poor family in the woods, and how people kept attacking and hurting him, eventually causing him to swear revenge on all humans, including his creator, Frankenstein, which is apparently why he murders his brother and then frames the nanny for it. Frankenstein is devastated by this event, starts chasing the monster, and upon meeting him, the monster pleads with Frankenstein to make him a wife as hideous as him so he can at least be happy. First he agrees, but then changes his mind when he's frightened by the idea of a race of monsters plaguing humanity. The creature, in response, murders Frankenstein's beloved wife and adopted sister, which saddens their father so much he dies a couple of days later. Frankenstein swears to chase the monster and kill him. Going after him, when he finally gets so close he can see him, he collapses. This is where the expeditors find him. The idea of a scientist creating life and then being horrified by his work popped into Shelley's mind after some discussions about galvanism, the now abandoned idea that electricity is a driving force of life. She thought that reanimating a corpse would be a horrifying enough idea to write down, and thus the story of Victor Frankenstein, the young scientist ruined by his ambitions, was born. Even though the story was inspired by galvanism, the way Frankenstein creates and animates the monster is not specified in the book. He discovers a specific element of life which he keeps secret from his peers and gets material from the dissecting room and slaughterhouse to construct the body. He makes him remarkably large, around 8 feet tall, because he has difficulties constructing the smaller features, and he makes him beautiful at first. But after he brings him to life, his process being kept ambiguous, the creature turns horrifying. The use of electricity and the stitched together parts of corpses came from the films the book inspired. The most popular one is the 1931 movie Frankenstein, directed by James Whale. Even the earlier version, the silent film, also titled Frankenstein, created in 1910, has shown him mixing different chemicals. The way the monster is portrayed in the book is not the favorite way of, well, most filmmakers. A majority of the movies show an unsympathetic, pure evil and not someone who became that way due to how he was treated by others. In the silent film, upon witnessing true love between Frankenstein and his bride, the monster simply disappears, as well as the evil within Frankenstein himself. In the 1931 movie, he is burned inside the place of his creation by an angry mob. Both end with a happy ending. At the end of the book, however, Victor Frankenstein dies and the monster floats away on an ice sheet, promising to end his life. This ambiguity in the ending is what gave way to the creation of such masterpieces as I, Frankenstein, where the creature survives and lives to the modern age. What a riveting idea! Also, here's when I mentioned the fact that, as you probably already know, calling the monster Frankenstein is not right. That's the creator's name. I'll have to get out of character for a bit to say that I love Shelley's story so much. It's original, wonderful, nuanced, you feel for the characters and in the world we live in. A cautionary tale about the dangers of ambition is always nice. There are many ways to go about this story. What I want to talk about is what I can. I'm not a literature expert, nor do I claim to be, but I somewhat understand science and I find bioethics fascinating. So let's do that. Let's pick the story of Frankenstein apart through the lens of a scientist and a bioethicist. Can you bring something inanimate to life? Something you stitched together yourself? For now, let's put the ethical debate on whether we should aside and focus on the question on whether we could. Galvanism is the thing that apparently inspired the idea of the story and mainly describes the generation of electric current using chemical reactions. Luigi Galvani, the person it's named after, found that if he touched the nerves of skinned frogs with electrodes, the animal moved its limbs. Therefore, he theorized that this so-called animal electricity was the driving force of life. Another scientist, Alessandro Volta, rejected the theory of innate electricity. He thought an external source was the thing that animated these lifeless parts. While he was wrong, electric currents do happen within our bodies. You know, our hearts generate their own electric currents, for example. But this belief did lead him to create the first ever battery of some sort. His discovery led to many experiments, including dead bodies and batteries. One such experiment was performed by Giovanni Aldini on the body of a 26-year-old executed criminal, in which he led electricity into the body that began to quiver, shake, flail its limbs, and according to reports, it even opened one eye. Aldini allegedly also cured a man with melancholy using electric shocks, and while he could never reproduce this success, electricity was tried in many different kinds of diseases for years to come. In the early days of anesthesia, electric shocks were used to resuscitate patients who have been overdosed on chloroform. At this time, electricity was thought to be a respiratory stimulant because when they shocked people, they appeared to gasp. They thought if someone dies, they first need to restart breathing and the heart will follow. Successful attempts at waking the patients using this method were likely due to unintended defibrillation, though. James Lind, a scholar, naturalist, and advocate of galvanism, was actually a tutor of Percy Shelley, Mary Shelley's husband, and so his demonstrations of galvanism might have influenced the story of Frankenstein through stories. I mentioned defibrillation just now. If you were thinking how that's similar to what we are talking about, since you're basically bringing back someone to life using electricity, then congratulations, you're following the topic. And you're wrong. In the case of defibrillation, electricity is used to shock the heart back to a normal rhythm, but it can't restart a heart that's already completely stopped. Sorry, the movies lied to you. There is also a limit on how long and when you can bring someone back to life. Clinical death is when the heart stops and breathing ceases. This state can be reversed lots of times, and if help arrives quickly enough, the organs won't even get damaged by the lack of oxygen. A more serious kind is brain death. In this state, there's no measurable electrical activity in the brain and spine. The person themselves is already gone, but they are clinically speaking alive. After 3 to 5 minutes of clinical death, brain damage usually occurs, which means a person might be able to come back but not recover fully, and after a while, brain death happens, from which there is no coming back. From the chest down, though, different body parts react differently to the lack of oxygen. The limbs especially well. Even detached from the body, they can be reattached and not suffer any damage for hours. This means stitching together different parts and bringing the resulting creature to life, and it resulting in a functioning conscious being is zero, with our current understanding at least. But I'm also talking about what I think could happen and what the movies had shown, not the original text, in which, as I mentioned, the exact process is kept ambiguous. It's only said that Frankenstein discovered a way in which he could create organic living material, so he might be onto something we don't know of. We could talk all day about what it means to be alive, when life ends and where it begins, but two things. I don't think we should go for those definitions when talking about Frankenstein's monster, since life doesn't mean the same thing here, and I don't want to. In my opinion, a bit more fitting definition is when we're talking about all life, the carefully created description when an organism is considered living when it can feed on an energy source, react to its environment, and reproduce. Adhering to this, can we create something that fits at least this description? By a minimal standard, the simplest living organisms are bacteria. Can we at least make an artificial one? Synthetic cells are a thing. Sure, they are compiled from organic material mostly produced by already living things, and they don't exactly fit the criteria, but are coming closer and closer, so maybe in the future. And also, scientists have shown that it is possible to recode the entire genome of an E. coli strain and for it to keep its viability, but that's still not making life from scratch, is it? It's important to understand, though, that these experiments are not about playing God, but about trying to understand how life came to be. The definition of life, according to Merriam-Webster, is a bit lacking. That's how it always is with reductionist definitions, right? Not every living thing can reproduce, but at least their kind can. Usually. Frankenstein's monster eats. He for sure interacts with his environment. He might be able to reproduce. Frankenstein's fear of making him alive does imply he made him able to, which means he's alive.
Oh, it's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
We're still talking about man-made life here. Frankenstein's monster wasn't born, he was created. He occasionally refers to Frankenstein as his father. He's something in between of a biological and an adoptive father who also happens to be a neglectful piece of shit with a god complex. Once his creature starts committing horrible acts, Frankenstein feels responsible. He thinks that he made the creature, so he must be the one that destroys it.
I made him with these hands, and with these hands I'll destroy him.
I feel like I must mention that I'm not religious, so when I'm bringing up those kind of standpoints, those aren't my own views. But I also don't think you have to be religious to have an icky feeling about making artificial life. However, the underlying reasons as to why might be different. If we jump back to galvanism for a bit, there was a scientist named Andrew Cross in the 19th century who claimed that in an experiment using electricity to create mineral crystals, insects started to appear over a period of a few weeks, which he described as the perfect insect standing erect on a few bristles which formed its tail. Hundreds of them, actually. Subsequently, as papers began writing about his experiments, they created the impression that he made them using electricity, for which he received death threats, among other things. At this time, the link between life and electricity was thought to be so obvious that it was no question to outsiders that Cross made those living things, which was seen as blasphemous. This distrust we have even today towards anything we can see as both alive and not natural is a relatively new idea. For example, when alchemists tried creating life back in the Golden Ages, theologians didn't see this as playing God, but as forcing God's hand, which was equally as bad in their eyes. Like, if they succeeded in making a homunculus. Making a homunculus. Like if they succeeded in making a homunculus, a human-like creature, then since only God could assign a soul to a body, the creature either wouldn't have one, or God would be forced to give them one. Only when we began to understand the molecular mechanisms of life, that's when the fear of God becoming obsolete came to be. Before, all life was made from living matter to which God apparently issued this life. Creating this matter in the first place, we'd be playing God. The subtitle of the book, The Modern Prometheus, points to exactly this. Biologist J.B.S. Haldane, in this 1924 book, Daedalus or Science and the Future, wrote, "The chemical or physical inventor is always a Prometheus. There's no great invention from fire to flying which has not been hailed as an insult to some god. But if every physical and chemical invention is a blasphemy, every biological invention is perversion. There's hardly one which, on first being brought to the notice of an observer from any nation which had not previously heard of their existence, would not appear to him as indecent and unnatural." Nowadays, the name Frankenstein pops up every time in some variation when a new form of tinkering comes on. It happened with in vitro fertilization, the pejorative term Frankenfoods when talking about GMO, all sending a clear message that it's bad, dangerous, and we should leave all this alone because it's not natural. And assuming from this, natural is good. By the way, you want some tea? I picked the leaves in that empty lot a few blocks away. They gave me an awful rash. It still hurts quite bad, but it's natural. Every scientific advancement comes with its own set of backlashes, and the word Frankenstein or Franken became a popular substitute for an argument against them. While the story itself is about the moral failing of a scientist, how he was driven to do immoral acts in order to pursue his ambitions and then denies responsibility initially when it all goes south, many misinterpret the message and use it to reject any kind of progress. Scientists in the public eye are often portrayed as mad, isolated people only focused on their work, not regarding what it could bring onto society, just as Victor Frankenstein, who's blinded by his ambitions and creates a mockery of life, a reflection of the worst in him. So I guess the takeaway message here is that while we know a lot, we still don't know enough to fully understand how life works and how it came to be. We can't make life from scratch, and scientists generally aren't isolated entities without morals. And those who do operate without morals and conscience are usually cast out. As creating life is an interesting topic, we could talk for hours about the opposite as well. Interestingly, this doesn't play the same for some people who oppose the former, as many of them don't seem to have a problem with things such as wars, violence against those they don't like, capital punishment. When Frankenstein decides to hunt the monster down, his emotions are still not concerns or empathy. He's driven by anger for how the monster turned his whole life upside down, and it seems like revenge rather than doing the right thing. I am not condoning the things the monster did. He did suffer, but that's no reason to wipe out someone's family as revenge either. If we would apply the same reasons to taking life, we tend to apply to creating life, how it's unnatural and therefore wrong, we'd have to go down a different kind of rabbit hole. As for the unnatural ways of ending a life, there are non-stop debates about separate kinds, and people who believe one to be wrong won't necessarily believe the other to be wrong too. You might be against capital punishment, but for the right to euthanasia. You might be for IVF and against man-made life. See, this is why I'm not a fan of the unnatural is bad argument on either side, because it's rarely consistent. I could see how someone seeing the creation of Frankenstein's monster could say that it is unnatural and therefore killing him would be restoring the natural order. I just wouldn't agree with it. I think this could be seen as a system justification argument where something that doesn't fit into the current system has to be wrong to justify the system's order. And what system is it that the monster can't fit into? His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful, great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness, but these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed almost the same color as the dun-white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips. The physical attractiveness stereotype is a tendency to assume that attractive people have more good personality traits than their unattractive counterparts. This is an unconscious bias, and many psychologists are fascinated by this phenomenon. We don't exactly know what causes it, but it does exist. Attractive people have better chances at getting well-paying jobs, teachers pay more attention to students they see as attractive, not even to mention finding a partner. It's a bit of a two-edged sword though, with one edge being sharp as hell and the other as a butter knife. People perceived as more attractive have difficulties getting jobs considered less desirable and are widely seen as entitled or vain, but the positives still seem to outweigh the negatives by a large margin. It differs between cultures what people find attractive. Facial symmetry is brought up a ton, but probably something that's a bit more universal is visual indications of health, like clear skin, good posture, stuff like that. These deeply rooted biases are the kind of stuff we don't like to talk about. We want to think we don't have them, but then we wouldn't be able to see our own biases when they come to the surface occasionally. I'd like to add, being attractive might increase your chances in some ways in life, but not guarantee them, just as not being perceived as conventionally attractive won't ruin all your chances. This perception comes up in pop culture way more than once. Tolkien described the evil orcs as hideous, and good beings, such as elves, as beautiful. The Hunchback of Notre Dame is one of the most well-regarded stories with a core theme about how appearances are not everything. And how could anyone forget the Beauty and the Beast? Hell, so many children's stories center around how you shouldn't judge based on how someone looks, the story of the ugly duckling being a prime example. The family the monster learned to speak from by listening to plays a huge part in his understanding on how he's perceived. One time, the blind father is left alone, so the monster decides to talk to him. He shows him kindness, something he had never seen before, and the old man decides to help him befriend the young couple. When they return, they are immediately appalled by the sight of the monster and attack him, so he is forced to leave. Later, he sees a child falling into a stream of water. He saves her, but when her father sees him, he grabs his daughter, shoots the monster in the shoulder, and runs away. Only one person has ever shown kindness to the monster, someone who couldn't see him. Even his creator was appalled by the sight of him long before he'd done anything that would warrant the hostility. Of course, the argument about how attractive people are perceived by society isn't entirely fitting here. The way Frankenstein described his appearance, he barely looks human. But he acts human. His initial intentions, wanting to find love, friendship, and companionship, are very human. He is curious and intelligent, self-aware, and what could be more human than these traits? He is denied all this because of the way he looks, not his actions. Most adaptations are usually not so generous. They only portray the monster as an evil being. The 1931 movie goes as far as just giving him a criminal brain, and that makes him evil. He's also depicted as not being able to speak. He only mumbles and acts like a wild beast. In Bride of Frankenstein, the sequel to the 1931 movie, he learns to somewhat speak, but only in short sentences. However, he does seem self-aware and seems to know of his unnatural state. This is what people think when they hear Frankenstein, as most appearances in pop culture show a zombie-like creature, one that's far from the well-spoken, well-read monster whose only wish in life was to find acceptance. Want to know how the part when he saved the girl from drowning is adapted in the 1931 film?
No!
Just for no reason. He has a criminal brain, so he just does stuff. Learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example, how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge and how much happier that man is who believes his native town to be the world than he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow. I feel like I killed the mood a bit with that last chapter. As I already said, the story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of ambition, but it also unintentionally fed into the trope of mad scientist, and the name Frankenstein became synonymous with anything new and distrusted. Ignorance is bliss. That's what the quote means, and also what you hear a lot. This idea that dumb people are happier is kind of offensive in my opinion. Happiness is such an abstract thing. To one person, knowledge itself could be the very thing that brings happiness, while to another, it might be something entirely separate. Ambition can also be nice. It's good to want to do more, to provide more. It has its dangers, of course. Frankenstein, during the creation of the monster, he himself became a kind of a monster. The dangers of ambition are in the cases when we lose ourselves and sight of what's important. The point when Frankenstein became obsessed with his work and nothing else existed for a while is when his ambition became a curse. When there is nothing left, only the goal, let it be money, fame, or a scientific discovery that changes everything, that's when people will run over everything and everyone in order to get what they want. In August 2021, Matthew Schrag, a neuroscientist at Vanderbilt University, started going down a rabbit hole that eventually led him to uncover one of the biggest scandals in science we had seen in the recent years. He alleges that many of the most cited papers in Alzheimer's research were fraudulent. According to him, their data and images were tampered with, and it all pointed to one scientist, Sylvain Lesnay. This case is a major setback to the research into the disease and possible cures, and will probably weaken the public's trust in science, sadly. In an article, Shrek said, "You can cheat to get a paper. You can cheat to get a degree. You can cheat to get a grant. You can't cheat to cure a disease. Biology doesn't care." If you ask me, I'd say this exact thing is what the story of Frankenstein warned us about. Not GMO, not IVF, and not creating synthetic bacteria, but the cases when an individual loses sight of what's really important.